It's all about growing myself, growing my team, and growing the business. Like, what your team needs is for you to be able to have the clarity of vision. If you can align how this activity is going to help you move forward, then I think then that gives it some level of credence, credibility. If you can't identify anything, then it's time to probably find that space, get away on the hill, do something to start reflecting on what needs to change.
Imagine mastering time itself. Jones Laughlin doesn't just dream it, he delivers it. This global speaker and author of Juggling Elephants, and today we're going to talk about his new book, Focus as a Bee, equips leaders with bold, practical tools to conquer chaos and focus what matters most. From leadership in FedEx to the US military, his P approach, we're going to get into powerful ideas, practical solutions, and personal touch sparks results. Buckle up. Jones is here to transform how you lead, live, and thrive. Thank you, Jones, for being on the podcast today.
Wow, Jason, with an introduction like that, wow, this is exciting. Appreciate the energy that you bring to these segments and looking forward to offering some tips of value to your listeners.
Yeah, I love it. I know you've got the bee behind you, so this was perfect for the book. Jones, you have a lady in there named Sydney, and her journey begins with the swarm of bees in her backyard. And a lot of people would look at that. I know you were symbolizing that as chaos, but that it led to a thriving future if we read the book. And I encourage everybody in the show notes below, the link will be there to grab the book now. How can leaders embrace chaotic moments in their organizations as opportunities for transformation? And maybe you can start off and share Sydney's story in the beginning.
Sure. Sydney is a young professional who is trying to figure out how to move projects forward at work, but she's just finds herself distracted by her teammates, by other things that are going on. She's not making the progress she wants in her personal life. There's just some things that aren't getting done because she just feels like like the bees she sees outside her window, are just flying from one thing to another. And so she sees this swarm of bees and she goes, wow, that's chaotic. And the connection we begin to make there is that moments of chaos are really opportunities for transformation. The reason those bees are swarming is because they sensed something in the hive wasn't working. And about half the bees said, you know what, it's time to get out of here and go somewhere where there's greater possibility. And that's what change is. It is chaotic, and it offers an opportunity to leave behind the old and go embrace something new, even if you don't know what that new is yet. At least getting out of the high gives you the opportunity to see, literally, some new opportunities for growth and transformation.
I love that. And what do you when you're talking to leaders specifically, what's the first step in shifting that mindset for a leader?
I find the first mindset is a leader has to begin to be more intentional about being aware of what's going on with their team or what's going on around them. I think it includes asking questions of your team members. Jason, I find lots of leaders, I'm sure you see this too, who are uncomfortable asking questions of their team members because they're afraid of the answers they might get. And I think that's just so critical that leaders have the courage to say to their team members, what are you noticing? What are you seeing? What are we not doing you think could help us move forward? And then listening to those answers and then bringing it to the team and say, okay, based on this information or these insights, what do y'all think would be a step forward for us? What should we be doing that we aren't doing? So I think that's the first step for leaders, is to start asking better questions of your team and listening to the answers that they're giving you.
Well, on the permission to prioritize, because I thought this was so interesting. It's kind of the foundation of focus, and in this Instagram society that we're in now. And then also now you have leaders, a lot of leaders are just juggling endless demands. I mean, from BMs to text messages to Slack messages to emails. I mean, the list goes on and on. Now we've got Microsoft Teams and all these different things. Leaders juggling endless demands. What do they discern? What's the most important in the moment? Like permission to prioritize. Can you share that?
Sure. Permission to prioritize is all about, again, stopping, reflecting, assessing what are those activities I can engage in today that will make the most difference next month, next year, 3 years. Unfortunately, when we respond to something urgent, we get that hit of dopamine that says, oh, you got something done.
Mhm.
Was it necessarily the most important thing to get done? And chances are the answer is no, because it wasn't screaming at you like the Slack message or the notification on your smartphone from Instagram. And so I think for leaders, it's important to ask themselves that question. What are those activities that are going to help me move our team closer to accomplishing our goals, not just what's the fire I need to put out next?
Yeah, because and I noticed this as a leader, you could be so busy, so caught up in just putting out, like you said, those fires over and over again. In the book, Sydney's challenges the saying, busy as a bee. And then you talk about it as like reframing it as focus as a bee. What's the biggest misconception that leaders have about busyness? Let's talk about that word.
Yeah, that it's productive. That's the biggest misconception is that because I'm engaged in activity, we must be doing great things. Not necessarily. Remember, I love that quote. It's not so much being busy, but why are you busy? The
Mhm.
bee is praised, the mosquito is swatted. There's all kinds of things that we can be engaged in that aren't necessarily moving us forward. And so the distinction we make between busy and focused is that focused is the intentional direction of your time and energy toward what matters most. Let me say that again. The intentional direction of your time and energy toward what matters most. That's focused. Busy, you could be using lots of time and energy, but you might not necessarily be directing it toward those highest priorities.
I love that, Jones. A lot of leaders were masters in something, and then that's how they became a leader. And they know and do something. Like I know a thing with me was I wanted to just go ahead and do what the sales staff were supposed to do. And then I would be busy doing everybody else's work instead of actually doing what I needed to focus on, the coaching and looking at the reports and doing the macro stuff. How can you break free from this trap, and get away from the busyness aspect of it and kind of make this 2.0 you where you can have meaningful progress?
Yeah. I'm going to dive into another one of my metaphors, not to confuse your audience today. One of my other books is about how to lead with a gardener's mindset, and part of that comes from a quote that I heard years ago by Peter Singh, who wrote the Discipline of Change. He said, "When it comes to leadership and leading change, we keep bringing in mechanics when what we need are gardeners." And that just yeah, I mean, that great? It's
That's
okay, of
good.
course,
That's
as a
great.
former horticulture teacher, I'm like, "Yeah!" But the whole idea there is that it's so easy, especially when leaders usually have a technical background, and that's why they were promoted because they were really good at fixing stuff.
Mhm.
Then they start using that same mentality of fixing stuff when they get in leadership roles. And if they start shifting their mindset toward, you know what, I am a gardener. It's all about growing myself, growing my team, and growing the business. Then you don't see the same value in just trying to look for what are the problems I need to fix. Now it's, there's Jason. I wonder what Jason needs to deliver his best work. What are the resources that I need to be able to grow into the leader that I want to be? So I think that mindset starts with saying, it's not about the technical expertise, it's about my ability to grow myself, my team, and the organization.
Yeah, that's so good. And it reminds me of the hexagon of permissions. And you talk in the book about the efficiency of honeycomb. When I was in the Marine Corps, there's a lot, especially when it comes to, aircraft and things that we do, materials. We've copied the honeycomb because of its efficiency and its lightweight. Why did you decide to talk about the honeycomb and why did you call it the hexagon of permissions?
Yeah. Well, we believe as we were developing the book, we found that when we started asking ourselves, okay, what do I need to give myself permission to focus? That's kind of like the overarching idea, of course, in the book is how do you do that? And as we started building that out, we eventually came up with those six. I mean, we could have done nine or 10, but we said these are the six that if you practice these, you'll have the ability to focus more intentionally more often. And so that's why we modeled it after the hexagon because it's also easy to remember because it's what the bees use. The bees
Mhm.
know this is the strongest structure you can create to be successful. We believe these are the six key permissions that will help you to focus on those most important things at work and outside of work as well.
What's one you think leaders overlook the most?
Glad you asked that question, Jason. I think two of them, but I'll give you one, and if we want to do the other later. One is the permission to be unavailable.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
talk to so many leaders and coach so many leaders who say, "Yeah, Jones, but I need to be available to my team." And like what your team needs is for you to be able to have the clarity of vision to resource them in ways that help them grow. And if you're always, available to them and putting out fires and just having those incidental conversations, you're not giving yourself the space to sit back and go, okay, where are we headed right now?
Mhm, mhm.
What does my team need? And you don't get into that strategic mode, which is so critical for leaders. You're just fixing stuff. Going back to that analogy, you're just spending your day fixing stuff. So I think that's the one that leaders overlook the most often is you got to have that space for yourself to look at the bigger picture and to plan more efficiently and effectively.
Yeah, I know the open door policy, you'll hear that a lot, and what I found with that was 80% of my time was being spent with the extroverts, but the introverts, until I learned coaching, they never would come in my door,
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
would just get like the guys carrying coffee, the extroverts carrying coffee, and "What's up, boss? How's it going?" And then and it's a constant interruption of the extroverts, and so the introverts just got left out, not doing anything. So Alicia's influence in the book, Alicia's clarity and focus inspires Sydney to change. How can leaders identify and leverage the Alicias in their lives?
Yeah.
And kind of maybe share that story a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. Let's start there with the story. The reason we use Sydney and Alicia is this. This is a business book written as a narrative, and the narrative is between Sydney and Alicia. And we've already described Sydney. Alicia is her best friend, has been for many years. The background on that story is that my daughter's name is Sydney, and she had a best friend named Alicia, who was that positive influence in her life. And what the story is built on is what their lives might have looked like if both of them had continued to be able to be best friends. Unfortunately, Alicia passed away just in a tragic moment, and so that's the backstory on that. And so we wanted this book to not only be a business book, but also a tribute to Alicia and her impact on Sydney and others. It wasn't just that. To your question about how do we leverage that, I think I think it's all about finding those people who will speak into your life and work, who have your best interest at heart, who are your cheerleaders. We've heard it before. Leadership is lonely or is lonely at the top, and leaders are lone wolves. And I think it's so critical that leaders develop consistent relationships with those people who they can just sit down with and say, "I am going to strangle my team," and then that person look, "Oh, cool, tell me what's going on." And then they can feel unencumbered and share from, okay, this is what's happening, and that person to sit there and go, huh. I mean, it is a coach, and it's so much more. It's finding those people who you can, talk to, who will then say, "Okay, well, what are you gonna do about it? What do you think a step forward might be?" And so that they don't just, grovel, but they also start to see a way forward to have better results with their team.
Yeah, that's so good. That's gold. Sydney, she struggled with follow through, and you have permission to plan. What's the most practical planning strategy you've seen leaders adopt? Because I want to kind of be like not just theory, but kind of throw down the practical because you do that. What's a good practical planning strategy you've seen adopt from the book that can create like an actionable outcome?
Yeah. When I think what's most effective for leaders is they have to start with, I mean, let's just use Covey's words, start with the end in mind. I think they have to get clarity of outcome and then thinking about how can each team member contribute to that outcome? We talk about in the book this whole idea of one jobs and how every bee in the hive has a specific job that they clearly carry out until it's done. And because of that, the hive is so productive and effective in accomplishing its outcome because everybody is so clear on what their one jobs need to be. I think for leaders, once you've decided that outcome, what's going to be the contribution that each one of your team members is going to need to make? And where are the gaps? Okay, if I want Jason he needs to take lead with this. I really want him to, own this. How do I feel about Jason doing that? Do I feel like a
Mhm.
10 that, yeah, he's got it? Or you know what? I need to resource Jason. I need to work with Jason to get him more up to speed or more confident about taking on that so that he can do his one job and Jones can do his one job and Sarah can do her one job so that everybody can contribute as much as possible toward that outcome. We could talk a lot more, but I think that's a place to start when leaders are thinking about planning.
Yeah, and I love that. Like for me as a leader, if your mind's running a million miles an hour constantly and you have no clarity, you brought up Stephen Covey, which is so great, the Indian mind. For me, carrying this around and then it's because I can't even go through a movie or a TV show until I get like a great idea. And then I got to run to my laptop but if I could just write it down. So I just, at least if I have the idea, then I can look at it later. Give myself permission to watch the movie, I've earned it. I worked really hard that day. And I think a lot of people, they struggle with follow through because they don't, like your book says, they don't plan intentionally. They don't have something clear. They don't even understand that, like you said, take a day by yourself, go to a hotel room or someplace, a coffee shop, and find the gaps. That's so important,
Yeah.
what you said there. A lot of leaders don't know their gaps if you ask them.
Yeah, yeah, because they're just so busy, as we would say, feeling productive because 'cause they're getting stuff done, and that's it. Let's call time out here too, Jason. That's uncomfortable for lots of leaders. I mean, it's
Mhm.
uncomfortable for me sometimes to say, "Where are the gaps? Where am I not operating at a 10 in my work or in my life? And what's my opportunity for improvement?" And that's why I think it's so important that leaders find a coach,
Mhm.
whether paid or someone who you admire who can play that role. Have someone who sees more in you than you see in yourself, that can help you move forward in ways that are important to you, who will ask you those tough questions so that you can begin to get clarity on what steps you need to take. I think that's so important.
Yeah, and you talk about it, and I love it, like flow state, but you call it the honey flow state as an optimal state of focus. What can leaders do? And I'm gonna use a word that most leaders aren't. What can they do to be proactive to create environments
Oh,
for themselves and their teams?
oh, thank you for this question. Love this question. Let's talk about them first. And you said it best. We have to work at getting into that flow state, or as you say, we call it the honey flow state because of the book concepts. We got to work at it. For example, when I really want to focus, Jason, I've got it blocked out on my calendar. Typically, put my phone on airplane mode. I actually will open a candle. I just got a lid on. I open a candle so a certain smell starts to permeate the room. Put my playlist on a certain playlist with no words because I don't want words because then I'll start singing to the songs and all that.
Right, right.
I sit somewhere else. I know your listeners are going, "This guy's weird," but I'll actually sit somewhere else in my office and
Mhm.
doing all of those things, I can just feel myself kind of getting into that. So then every time I want to focus, if I start moving to that, if I start yeah, and I start hearing I'm like, "Oh, yeah, this is my time when I focus." And so I think that's what we can do for ourselves is create the environment where you can focus. If you can't focus in the physical environment you're in, go somewhere else. Find somewhere that
Mhm.
you can and consistently go there. Now, as a leader of a team, I think you gotta think about what's going to help my team to be able to focus. Is it, setting expectations for Slack messages, okay? How soon should we respond to those or any inter-team messages? I think it's, can we set a half day on Friday or some day where we're not going to have meetings? Creating those guidelines that give people an opportunity to do some deeper work. Let's do meetings in 45 minutes instead of an hour or 25 minutes instead of 30 to give people the space to process before they
Mhm.
go to, the next event. And most important thing leaders can do to help their teams focus is to ask them. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you say that, what's your level of focus in doing your work? Well, I'm about a 6. How can I help you make that an 8? What can I do to help you get that number to a 9? And they might say, "Stop having so many darn meetings."
Mhm.
And you gotta, okay, help me. How do we do that? Because we got a lot of information going on. We got a lot of things to talk about, but leverage the wisdom of your team to improve that environment because then they're gonna take ownership and they're
Mhm.
gonna
That's
they're gonna help those focus things happen.
Yeah, that's so good because not only are we distracted, not only in our world, and they even said that, with people being out of the office. We have a lot of that in our industry in the tech world. Most companies, at least there's at least 3 days that they're working, at home. And that's so much distraction. There's so many ways and being a leader and then trying to herd cats almost because there's so many different schedules. That's something that I think is a huge issue with leaders when you have these high these high engaging people, they could work anywhere. They could work at Facebook, they could work at Google, they could work at, Chat GPT, wherever, OpenAI. And so you've got them. So you don't want to necessarily, like put too much pressure on them. But then at the same time, there has to be some cohesion. So that's something that leaders kind of juggle with, and having that ability to be able to get the team to focus, I think is a big one.
Absolutely. I think it's so important, and I think it starts with having that honest conversation about how things are doing and what's preventing you. What do you find are your biggest distractions, each week or at work? What's keeping you from getting some of this deeper work done? Because I want to make sure you're getting it done. See, now we're thinking like a gardener. How do I grow that team member? How do I create the environment where they can grow and deliver their best work? And when they give you those answers, really genuinely looking at, okay, how's that gonna help? Now, I know you've got some people listening who, especially some of your tech leaders, are going, "Yeah, Jones, but I gotta get all this work of mine done, and you're telling me I gotta focus on the development of these people?" Here's the thing, if you grow your team, they're gonna leave you alone more often. They're
Mhm.
not gonna need you for those little detail, time suck kinds of stuff because you're growing them, and now you can find more of that space you need to be strategic, to think longer term. If you invest the time up front to resource them with what they need to focus.
Yeah, Jones, that's so great. And something that you said earlier, just a few minutes ago was they'll take ownership of it. When they take ownership of it, that's that self responsibility that falls on them. And then in turn, they're not going to, if you have a person bugging you, I had to learn this the hard way. If you have a person bugging you constantly on little things, they haven't took ownership of the project. It's my project, not the team member's project. So, and this is something that kind of seems controversial to some leaders, and you talk about recharging like bees. And I did not know this, that bees rest more than they work in a healthy. I always just think of bees just working
Just
constantly.
working, being workaholics. Yeah. I'm gonna blow your mind. Okay, you ready, Jason? In a healthy beehive, bees, each bee takes about 40 naps per day. Okay. Now, wait, there's more. The foraging bees, the bees that are working the hardest, may take up to 50 naps per day. Now, it's not 2 hours at a time with a little eye mask and laying down a little bee pillow, but they stop for just a moment to rest because what they just did took energy away and they want to be ready for the demands of the next moment. So they stop and rest for a moment. How many leaders could be more effective if they would recognize, you know what? That meeting this morning really drained me. Or you know what? I've been really working on next year's budget and wow, I've been focusing. I'm exhausted. Great. Don't keep pushing. Stop for a moment. And that means whether it's standing up, whether it's stretching, whether it's walking outside, whether it's, getting some water, but do something to rest from what's been draining you so that you can be your best when that team member says, "I'm ready to quit." You're like, "Okay, I can be fully present with you because I took a moment to rest." Yeah, that permission to recharge is so important for leaders. Now, we could talk about even things like, taking weekends and spending more time investing yourself, but I'm talking about just in the normal course of a workday, stopping strategically before you set out on your next task.
Yeah, I think most of us feel guilty, and it's just this narcissistic. I had to say, like, why am I feeling guilty? And it came down to I have this inherent feeling like I'm never good enough. So I always have to do more. And it's bad fuel and it got me to where I'm at. But at the end of the day, that guilt, you know that you're gonna, and your book talks about this, that you're gonna make better decisions and have better decision making if you're rested. So why wouldn't you?
Yeah. And to add to what you just said, Jason, I will ask leaders the question or managers, or even I'll give you an example that may seem a little out. Sometimes I've got moms who work from home who say, Jones, I've got kids, and so I just always want to be there, and I just have no time for myself. And I can ask them this question. I can say, how would you be a better mom if you took 30 minutes a day for yourself? And they will always just be more patient. I'd be more focused on them. I'd be more present with them. Same thing for your leaders, managers, supervisors. How would you be a better manager if you took 30 minutes a day
Mhm.
to work on some things for yourself or to think about the team? Oh, I'd be more patient when John came in to talk to me. I'd have better clarity about what each team member needs to be doing right now so that we can actually meet this goal the organization has given us. There's such value in taking that time for yourself to help grow your team.
Yeah, yeah, that I love how you compared that to with kids because it's so true. If you're just around your kids 24/7 and you're giving into their every win, it's the same as a leader just being around the people and then just, serving constantly. I want to get into because I thought this was really interesting. Adaptation or adapting to change. Sydney's growth involved giving herself permission. Here's once again giving yourself permission to change based on new information. And I know bees adapt to their environment. Can you talk a little bit about the bee side of things, adapting, and then go into adaptation for growth?
Sure, sure, absolutely. Well, for bees, of course, they're constantly having to be aware of what's going on around them. For example, right now in my part of the United States, we're getting ready to hit the honey flow season for bees. So they've got to be aware that, hey, this is when the pollen and the nectar are most available. We got to go get it. So they're ramping up honeycomb production. They've got more bees that are going out foraging. I mean, are changing what their one jobs are so that they can be ready to meet the demands of this season. They are observing that. Every bee is communicating it to another bee so they know exactly what they need to do. I think the same is true in organizations and for teams is that they've got to be aware of what's going on around them. Part of my history, Jason, includes working as a trainer for the book Who Moved My Cheese? Okay,
Mm.
those of you listening under 35, there was a book called Who Moved My Cheese?
It was number one forever.
Well, it is really it's still up there because it's a powerful message about change. But in that, one of the characters talked about the handwriting on the wall in times of change. And it taught and I always took that to be three things: facts, feelings, and wisdom and experience. And so I think when it comes to change, pay attention to the facts. What are the facts telling you? Okay.
Mhm.
Be willing to look at them. And yeah, that's everything from pivot tables to market reports and all that. But also be aware of your feelings.
Mhm.
What are you sensing? What's going on? What's the temperature of the team or what we're doing? And then finally is what's your wisdom and experience telling you that says the status quo is not going to work anymore. And if you take all of that information in, and then if you present it to a group of people who can be looking at it going, wow, I thought I was the only one who was thinking that, then you can begin to develop that plan for transformation or how do we change to meet the demands that we see, for the next 6 months, 1 year, whatever that horizon is.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you're in those meetings, you can feel not just for yourself as a leader, but certain members of the team that resistance. Because there's the change there. How do you overcome that? What are some of the things that you can do in your organization, especially when stakes are high? How can I overcome that resistance?
You know, that's tough, and we probably need another whole podcast for that one, Jason. So I'll look forward to being back. But I think when you sense that resistance, you've got to ask yourself, be curious about what's causing them to resist. Is it a
Mhm,
lack of
mhm,
information? Is it a lack of understanding? What's causing them to are they going to lose control of something that they own that's very important? Are they afraid of the skills that they're going to need to have to be successful in the change and they don't have them? It's being curious about what are they going to lose. I think that's one key. Another key I find is to create what's called a sensible vision for others in times of change. Dr. Johnson talked about this in his book, Who Moved My Cheese. He says, if you want people to be motivated to change, then you've got to give them a sensible vision. What makes sense to them that would cause them to go, yeah, I want to go there, or I'm willing to be uncomfortable. And I took that for another step when I do presentations about change. I say, okay, if you are successful with this change, what are you going to see? Physically
mm,
see. What are
mhm,
you going
mhm,
to hear? What are you going to be
mhm,
smelling, touching, tasting? But if you can come up with a sensible vision for those team members and it's something that's
mhm,
important to them, then all of a sudden, pardon my French, they get a picture. And what was it
mhm,
Aristotle said? The soul never thinks without a picture. People need a picture that where they're going is going to be better for than where they are based on their values and their needs. And if you do
That's so
that,
good. Yes.
well, if you do that, you'll get people who will do more than comply.
Mhm.
They'll connect and they'll engage with it. You're not gonna get everybody all the time, and if you always try to do that, you're gonna burn yourself out, but you'll get a lot more people on board if you say, "If we do this, we're going to see this. And that person goes, wow, yeah, I hadn't thought of that because all they heard
That's so
is
good.
change.
That's to me, this is one of the keys that's missing in leadership. And whether you're religious or not, it doesn't matter. Mega church pastors get this. They understand how to put vision out there. But in the corporate world, in the tech, in any of these other worlds, we don't do vision very well.
I agree. I agree.
And that's what you just said. You just said, like getting it. What is that? What does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? Most leaders don't understand that or know that.
Yeah, well, and it's such a simple thing to do. That's the thing is that and even you could even throw it out to your group. And I know your listeners are going, "Gosh, Jones, it sounds like as a leader, I need to be asking questions of my people a lot." Yes, you're right, because 'cause they're the front lines. They know what's going on. And but I wonder if we were to accomplish that, I wonder what we might see more of.
Mhm.
And let them tell you, and somebody goes, "Ooh, that's good," and involve them in that because then you're creating a shared vision. We hear that a lot. Leaders need to create shared vision, and you're doing it by using a sensible approach. So
Yeah,
again,
that-
I just
that's
this is
so
something
good.
that can be done. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
That's
That's
when
great.
Dr. Johnson said it to me, I was just like, "Bam!" That makes so much sense because if I can't see what you're talking about, I can't see where we're going. Well, let me paint you a picture here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the because most of the time it's like here's what I got from on high. If you're middle management, or what, it doesn't matter. Here's what I got. Here's what we're gonna do. You guys go do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's normally how it is. Let's get all these tasks done, and then there's just this constant flow of everybody's just doing tasks, and we wonder why no one's engaged.
And that goes back to where we started today. You're busy, but are you focused? You're
I
focused,
want to get.
outcome. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Jones.
No,
I
go
want
ahead.
I want to get into consistency as a superpower. This
Mhm.
permission, once again, there's the permission word. To be consistent ties, I think, all of these lessons together, especially for Sydney, for leaders who thrive on innovation and spontaneity, because there's a lot of those out there, that they may be the ones that are, come up with the great ideas or have good strategy, but they have a problem balancing consistency. What does that look like? And what are you meaning what's your definition of consistency for a leader?
Consistency for a leader to me is all about engaging in those consistent, routines, those habits, those behaviors that contribute to the outcomes that you're looking for. And so the whole idea for leaders are doing those things that will help grow yourself and grow the team, whether that's weekly check-in meetings with specific team members, a monthly, vision activity or something that you're doing, but those activities that will help you to be able to deliver results. Now, to something else you said, those who are innovative and creative or start saying, well, Jones, wait a minute. I don't want that much structure. Structure bothers me. Structure stifles my innovation. Really? Because research shows that those who have structure actually it allows them to be more spontaneous when they get to
Yes.
be, and so I think for leaders who feel that way, it's like, okay, if I create this structure, then it's actually going to calm my mind down so that when I want to think innovatively or I want to work innovatively, I'm not, so disshuffled with all my thinking because I've got order to my day and to my week and to what I'm doing. And that leaves me the freedom to be able to be more creative and innovative.
That's so good, Jones. I heard a story of an actor. He said that he had to memorize his lines and he would memorize them and say them, 100 plus times because he wanted to not think about the words.
Yes.
If he didn't think about the words, then he could practice how he's moving his hands. He could look in the mirror, or he could go on a stage and see his reflection of how the words are being presented. And I think that's what you're saying there.
Yeah.
Once you get this down and you just know that you're doing these and you're an expert in these things, that allows you to be more creative and more reflective on what your team's doing and who you are as a leader.
Yeah. Too many leaders are wearing themselves out making decisions they don't need to make. Whether that's because the team needs somebody else on the team needs making a decision, or they don't have a process for making a decision. And so, if you can come up with processes and routines that help you make decisions more efficiently and not use as much mental energy, that frees you up so much to be able to do those other things that are really going to move you and your team forward.
Yeah, that's so good. And moving forward, I think this was cool in the book. Sydney made a bold move and she wanted to bring the bees, but she brought the bees to Tangent's roof. When a leader takes a calculated risk, there's always this in the back of your mind, yeah, I would love to be able to do this or love be able to take this risk. But then one, I don't want to lose credibility. One, I don't want it to go wrong. How can we look at Sydney's story when we do get this vision and we do want to take a risk? How can we do that and not lose ourselves, if that makes sense?
Yeah. To me, first of all, is you ask yourself, how does this thing I want to do, if you will, how does it align with the vision? If it's not aligned with the vision, it's just something you think, well, this would be good to do, then that's probably dangerous. That's a risk
Mhm.
that you don't need to take. But if you can align how this activity is going to help you move the team forward or move the organization forward, then I think then that gives it some, level of credence, credibility. I think a second thing, if you remember in the book, she did go to her boss and talked about what she wanted to do. I think, it's always good to get your idea validated. Now, what was it? Somebody said about Henry Ford said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would said a faster horse. I think there's some truth to that, that you don't want to go to somebody who's just going to say, well, no, 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 no. But go to somebody who you can talk the idea out loud through. You can just at least
Mhm,
dispel,
mhm.
because from coaching, when you get people to verbalize things, they go, wow, that sounds a lot different than it did in my head.
Yes, yes.
And so I think that's important. And then the third thing I think is critical is if you have earned the trust of your team in the past, then you can say to this thing, we're gonna do this thing. And I really believe it's gonna be beneficial for us because I think it's gonna help us accomplish this. If the people know the why behind why you're doing it, then even if it fails, they'll forgive you. But if you keep them in the dark and you don't
Mhm.
give them some sense of why you're doing that, they're going to be much more suspicious of you the next time you say, hey, let's go try this amazing thing. They'll go, nope, last year it didn't go well. I didn't have a clue what you were doing, and I'm not going this time.
Yeah, that's so true. And, let's say we take the risk, we're good, we've got it, we get a small win. And this really hit me because it's so many times as leaders we don't really celebrate wins because we're not geared that way. Like for me, it's kind of like, yeah, I don't care. We're on to the next thing. Like, whatever. We're bringing some bagels, having some Chick-fil-A, or taking someone out to lunch, celebrating these small wins. It's the permission to celebrate. Share how important that is.
Yeah, it is. And you know what's interesting is that's not one of the 6 permissions in the book. You just did one of the key things that we hope people get from the book is that we believe these are the 6 permissions you need. You might have other ones. The key is you find the permission that's gonna help you to move forward. Now, to answer your question, you even use the language. I love what you just did there, Jason. Did you catch yourself when you said, "I'm just not geared"?
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
why? Leaders think like mechanics. And you just
Mm,
said,
yes.
we fix a problem, and then what do? We go fix another problem. Woohoo!
Yes, yeah.
Whereas a gardener, what does and my dad was an avid gardener, and during the gardening season, oh my goodness, every evening when he came in from the garden, he would be saying, "The tomatoes are blooming. The cucumbers probably grew 6 inches today. The pumpkins are coming up. It's almost time to dig potatoes." I mean, he was giving us all these reports of all these little things that were happening, and while it sometimes drove me crazy, I wish I had those moments back sometimes, he was looking for growth. And
Mm.
that to me is what celebrating small wins is all about, is you're saying to that team member, "I see growth in you, and let's celebrate."
Mm. Mm, that's
Because
so good.
if you do that, then guess what they're gonna do? They're gonna work even harder.
Mhm.
He noticed I'm growing, he celebrated it. Well, wow, I feel good. I'm gonna keep doing those things. That's why small wins are so important because it helps sustain people's motivation to keep going through a season of change and not to give up because you're the one looking and noticing, "Hey, that didn't work out perfectly, but we got some good data from it." So what's that gonna help us with next time? You're the one who's always looking and being aware of those small wins.
That's so good because you're strategically being proactive enough to build momentum and morale. And it's almost like what you're saying there, Jones. It's almost like as a leader, I'm thinking almost like micro wins. Like I need to be more, with my team, I need to be more. I saw that. I see it all the time. I just never mention it.
Yeah, yeah, and you being appropriate with, maybe it's just, call, "Hey, John, I see what you did there. It's great." Maybe it is something where you call attention to it in a team meeting if that person's comfortable with it, but it's just, what are you looking for? Jason, if your listeners go through their day and they constantly are looking at problems, they're gonna find them and they're gonna have a pretty negative attitude by the time day's over. But if they go through their day and they're looking for possibilities, not problems, they're looking at the small wins, they go, "Yeah." this is working. Wow, this could happen. We might be able to do this. And it really does sustain people's motivation to keep moving forward. Research
Mhm,
shows it's the number one thing that keeps people moving is letting them know that you're making progress and meaningful work.
mhm.
That we're getting close to that outcome. We've learned something we can use to help us move there. It's so important.
Yeah, I think it also allows you to be able to not only one, they're gonna take ownership because, like, you asked that question to them, and then now they take responsibility in owning it, but you've rephrased it in a positive format, and then it allows that adaptation to come into place to pivot, and I think that's so important.
Yes, well said. I mean, there's nothing really I can add to that. It does. It gives them that motivation to do something different if that's what the moment requires. Yeah.
Yeah, we're coming up on the hour, Joan. So I want to, my last question, I want to talk about, because I think this is what most leaders are surviving. You even hear this, how to survive your workday, how to survive this, how to survive your new promotion, all these different things. And the book is really about thriving. And that's what Sydney, she moves from surviving to thriving by adopting this B focus. What's the one question leaders should ask themselves daily to ensure they're not just building themselves up, but they're building and thriving, not just in themselves, but for the future of the team.
Yeah, yeah. I think a great question to ask is what am I growing? What's growing right now? Kind of going back to the gardener analogy. We'll
Mhm,
base metaphors again, but I think it's important to be aware of what am I growing? What am I building? And if you just kind of say, well, I don't have anything, that's dangerous.
mhm,
We're going through a season right now where we're just surviving right now. We'll thrive later. There's always the opportunity to use that chaos to learn something, to grow your team in some way, whether it's resilience, or whether it's the ability to problem solve, whatever it is, and looking for that opportunity. Because again, let's go back to our bees, our beloved honeybees. Every action they take helps move them toward the outcome they want. And what are you doing as a leader today that's moving you and your team forward? And if you can't identify anything, then it's time to probably find that space, get away on the hill, do something to start reflecting on what needs to change. What permission do I need to give myself?
That's so good, Jones. And your dad, the story of your dad coming in and saying this is happening, and it's those things. If you can't identify that, then you're not growing anything.
Yeah, yeah,
That
yeah,
that's pretty wild.
yeah. Yeah, you're fixing problems, and that nobody gets excited about fixing problems all day. Even a mechanic, at the end of the day, they want things to be running smoothly.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, that gardener approach, that's awesome. So, where can we're gonna, of course, have the book and links to your website and all that, but kind of share what you do, focus on what your company's doing and what you're doing. And I know you're a global speaker and you've been doing this for decades, but if you could kind of share even maybe some new things that you're doing besides
Sure.
the book.
Absolutely, yeah, and first of all, for people to connect with me, of course, joneslaughlin.com is my website. If there was some resources related to this podcast, joneslaughlin.com/podcast. We've actually got specific resources related to today's session that they can go and look at and find. A third place to find me where I is LinkedIn. I put out a lot of content on LinkedIn. I put out some learning tips every day around 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, and so that will be a great place. And I can learn more about what that person is doing. I love building relationships that way as well. So LinkedIn, just type in Jones Laughlin, it'll get you there. My biggest project right now is, the book, because when you birth a book, you need to be focused on making sure
Mhm.
that the message is getting out, that the message is strong, and that it's resonating. The next step for me, one of the things that we're working on right now that I'm really excited about is an assessment that people who either read the book or even if you haven't can take to pinpoint where they are not as focused as they could be. In fact, it's built on the six permissions. So they're going to be able to take that quick assessment. I think it's 24 questions, and they can then say, okay, my lowest area is permission to recharge. That's where I got the lowest score. And then we're going to be able to provide them resources that help them to
Mm.
improve in that area because we think that's critical. Even though Focus to Be, we believe is a very practical book, people are still going to put that down and go, okay, there's a lot of tips there, a lot of information. How do I take the next step? And we want to be able to give people that resource so they can continue to, as we say in the book, thrive in the ways that are important to them.
I always love that. You know what? I love when leadership books have workbooks. And this is kind of like whether you're doing it virtually or whatever, this is kind of, making it practical and putting it down and causing people to evaluate. And that's so much needed to self-coach themselves. Well, this has been amazing. I appreciate you. I appreciate the work that you're doing. And I know this podcast is going to help a lot of people. I encourage everyone to go, you support this podcast. How you do that is to help the authors that we bring on. So I encourage everyone to hop down below on the link and get this book. And I know it'll be of a help to a lot of people. And also subscribe to you on LinkedIn and go to the website. And I'll be looking on LinkedIn for when, the future happens with the assessment and all that. That'll be awesome. Thank you, Jones, for being on today.
My pleasure. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to learn from you today, Jason, because I appreciate your insights as well.